I read around 50 books in 2023, and these are the 8 worst books I read last year. Now, usually I don't enjoy making videos talking about the worst books I read, but really I think it's important that you guys are able to get to understand my reading taste better and also see where you agree or disagree with my reading taste. So really, this video's intention is not to like hate on any authors or books. A lot of these books are very, very popular, and if you love them, then I'm so happy for you. But without further ado, let's get into the books that I enjoyed the least. And the first book, I know someone will have skipped already now, and we're not gonna even listen to this piece, but this book is not a badly written book. Actually, in a lot of ways, I am blown away by the scope and the epicness and all the complexity in this book. But if I'm thinking about my enjoyment and the fact that I DNF'd this book halfway through, I have to include it on this list. And that is going to be Dead House Gates by Steven Erikson. Now, I already know I'm gonna get like 30 or 40 dislikes because I mentioned Malazan, but I just have to be honest. I've tried reading this book 2 times now, and I've DNF'd it at around the same point twice now. There's a lot of things I enjoy about this book. I think Steven Erikson is a brilliant writer. I think the complexity is incredible, and a lot of the themes about like nihilism and also just his ability to write a bleak story is absolutely masterful. And also like all the different cultures and stuff. I mean, there's so many things there are to enjoy in the Malazan series. But man, I've already made 2 or 3 videos talking about my experience reading Malazan, and it breaks my heart. I just cannot get into the series. But now it's been 8 months since I stopped reading Dead House Gates, and for some reason, I'm starting to get tempted to give the series another try. Like, I don't know what's wrong with me. I've already tried the series 2 times. But there's just something about Malazan that I really want to love it. I want to love it so badly. And I think the second time around when I picked up Dead House Gates, there were other elements that I actually enjoyed more than the first time around. So maybe on my third go, I'll enjoy it even more. And then on my first, I'll enjoy it even more maybe. Maybe I just need to pick up this series 5 or 6 times before I really get stuck into it, but we will see. But yeah, I DNF'd Dead House Gate, so it has to be on this list. Now, if you enjoy watching BookTube, which I'm sure you do since you are watching this video, then you might have considered starting your own BookTube channel, but might find it a bit overwhelming on figuring out where to start. Well, if you want to potentially start your own YouTube channel or even just gain some basic understanding of, for example, how to run a business, then I would highly recommend today's sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of online classes and members, and is truly a place to get inspired, learn new skills, and put them to work in impactful ways. Now, what really makes Skillshare unique is the fact that it has the largest online learning community for creatives with a massive depth and breadth covering topics such as illustrations, graphic design, marketing, and it also has creative career focused classes which can help you in areas such as marketing, freelancing, or even social media, and so much more. And it has a learn by doing approach to teaching, which I really appreciate. Now, one learning path that has really allowed me to learn more about how to create a brand was the Your Creative Business, Build It, Brand It, Launch It. Now, what is brilliant with learning paths is the fact that Skillshare has curated a list of classes that allow you to go from beginner to advanced, and the fact that this list is curated helps you save so much time. Now, while the whole learning path is brilliant, I found part 3, 4, and 5 especially useful when trying to create a YouTube channel and a brand, but I would highly recommend just checking out the whole learning path. Now, there is a link in the description down below where the first 500 people that use the link will get 1 month's free trial of Skillshare, so please go and check it out. Thank you so much for Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Now, let's get back to the video. Now, the next book I also DNF'd, and I think there's only 2 books I DNF'd in 2023, but that is going to be another bleak story, and that is Gunmetal Gods by Samuel Akhtar. Now, again, I think this book was just a bit too bleak to my taste. I mean, it was very well written. It felt very original and fresh because it's like a Middle Eastern steampunk fantasy or grimdark fantasy. Incredibly unique, and the scope is epic, and the world building was really, really great. There's particular one scene that really put me off continuing. But yeah, if you enjoy, I would even maybe not call it grimdark, but dark fantasy, because I thought it was very, very bleak, that this series should be right up your alley. I mean, Samuel Akhtar, I mean, this is just absolutely bloody, you know, and original. So yeah, I know a lot of people love this book, and I'm really sad that I didn't love it as much. But yeah, it was just a bit too dark for my taste, so it's not really a huge criticism, just a bit too bleak. And the third one is a book that is very, very short, and it's a booktube darling. And I know, for example, Fun Fantasy Books is gonna hate me for including this book, but that is Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher. Now this is a novella, and it's like a fairy tale, kind of whimsical kind of story. It definitely feels like a modern fairy tale, and I think that's also how it's been marketed. But I don't know how to describe this. I know this sounds savage, but I didn't enjoy almost a single page in this book. I mean, I didn't feel connected to any of the characters. The story was just whimsical, and occasionally I can enjoy whimsical books, but I just didn't really connect with the story at any point. It's quite absurd as well, and I definitely understand why people love it, because if you enjoy like whimsical fairy tales, then this is like a modern take on it, and overall it's probably quite well executed. But yeah, I just felt so bored, and it was a huge slog, and I think this book's like 150 pages, and I was so close to DNFing it, but since it was so short, I pushed myself all the way to the end. But really, I should just have DNF'd it earlier, because yeah, this is not a book that I enjoyed, and I have never recommended it on my channel, and I probably would never will, because it's just not a book that I enjoyed. Alright, moving on is The Fall of Babel by Josiah Bancroft. I've already made a full spoiler-free review about the series, and especially the last book. I read it with Library of Alexandria, Ole Erich Ben, Grace Dion, and Philip Chase, and I know Library of Alexandria loves the last book, and Philip Chase, for some reason, thought the last book also was a masterpiece. But honestly, I think The Fall of Babel is one of the most frustrating and potentially worst endings I read to a series in my whole life. The Books of Babel is a series that has so many great ideas and a lot of great moments, a lot of great characters, beautiful writing style, but man, was I frustrated with almost every single book. There are some elements I loved, and there are some elements I also hated with every book, except the last one, where I didn't have words. I got so angry when I finished the book. I was like, this is one of the worst uses of Deus Ex Machina I have ever come across in the genre. Like how, I think Bancroft, he didn't know how to finish the series, because he's created so many crazy things, and like, how do you wrap it up? He basically just didn't wrap it up. I mean, there could definitely be a fifth book here, because yeah, the way he concludes the series is, in my opinion, just so disappointing. Alright, moving on, probably my least favorite book that I finished this year is either gonna be The Fall of Babel or The Goblin Emperor by Catherine Addison, I think that's her name. Man, I know this book is also massively popular and has sold so many copies and people love it, but oh, this was such a slog, and I don't even know how to describe the prose. So I think if you're like a prose snob and you really like extremely like purple flowery prose, then this is probably a book that you would enjoy. It's basically about this goblin, right, that suddenly gets told the news that he is to become emperor, and he has no experience, and he has to navigate the courts and try to figure out how the politics works, how the kingdom works. And the premise is brilliant. I love politics in my fantasy. Actually, The Counselor, oh, I don't have a copy here, but that's a book, for example, that is almost pure politics, and it's one of my favorite books of all time. So I was like, I'm gonna enjoy this, because I've heard the prose is interesting, and it's very, very like political based, and also some people even call it a bit of a slice of life. But oh man, it was a nightmare, that book. Yes, the writing style is interesting, but it was just too much. The writing style, like, it gave me a headache to read this book almost. The pacing is awfully slow, and I think our protagonist, even though the premise is interesting, we didn't get a reason to be invested in our protagonist. Everything. I didn't enjoy that book, and I know so many people love it because it's different. It is different, but yeah, it's not a book I would recommend. I didn't give it 1 star because whenever I finish a book, I don't really give it 1 star because I wouldn't have read it all the way to the end. It was that bad. But yeah, that's probably a 2-star read for me. And then we have another booktube darling, which so many of my favorite booktubers love, but that's going to be Kings of the Wild by Nicholas Eaves. How many enemies am I gonna be creating in this video? Now, this was actually put forward for the Viking book club. So if you don't know, every single month I read one book that my patrons put forward, and we actually read it together. So we have like a book club going. And this was one of the books that was randomly chosen out of all the books that were put forward. And I knew instantly when this book was being put forward, I started getting worried, because I've heard that this is a swashbuckling, fun, humorous kind of fantasy story. And whenever people say that humor is a big element in a fantasy story, I start to get worried because it's very rare for the humor to work for me. And unfortunately, that was very much the case. I didn't expect to enjoy this book going into it. Actually, the first 100 pages I really enjoyed. But then it just became this swashbuckling, fun adventure, and it just felt like a side quest after a side quest after a side quest. If you enjoy like quest type of fantasy, you enjoy humor in your books, you enjoy swashbuckling, as I've mentioned already many times, then I think you're gonna have a great time with this one. But for me, it just became too much. I enjoyed when the band was starting to come together in the first 100, 150 pages. But yeah, the overall plot and the journey there, it was just too fun and absurd. A big disappointment, and I'm not gonna be reading the sequel, but I definitely understand why people love it. It's just not a book for me. Then probably the biggest disappointment of the year is Children of Ruin by Adam Tchaikovsky. Now, I read Children of Time. I also made a full spoiler-free review for that book, and it's one of my all-time favorite books now. It's a hard sci-fi book that I actually loved. I didn't just love it, I absolutely adored it. And then I read the sequel, and this book, I didn't connect to a single page in this book. I mean, it's a beautiful edition, but that doesn't mean that the story is great. It felt so different from Children of Time. If Children of Time was hard sci-fi, I don't even know what this is. This is like, it was so dry. It felt like reading a science book, and the characters weren't interesting, and mini spoiler, but the alien race here just, it wasn't as interesting as Children of Time, and in a lot of ways this felt like a totally separate story. It was almost like Children of Time was standalone and this is a standalone. There's some slight overlap, but man, this was a proper slog, and the last 30% I kind of skim read because I just had to get to the end of it because I was so disappointed. So yeah, this is the biggest disappointment of the year for sure, considering Children of Time, the first book, is one of my all-time favorite books of all time. This is like a 2-star read for me, and even at that point I feel it's quite generous. Is it well written? It is well written, but if I have to base it on my enjoyment, 2 stars is generous. And the last book I read this year that I was very disappointed, but it's also a book that I picked up just randomly because I read the synopsis and I was like, ooh, this sounds interesting. So the book I'm talking about is A Sword of Bronze and Ashes by Anna Smith Sparg. Now, Anna Smith Sparg is known for having a very unique writing style, and people often or generally hate her books or love her books. Now, I haven't read any of her books, but she had a new release this year, and this book was marketed as a lyrical folk horror high fantasy. And I was like, okay, and the cover is gorgeous. I was like, this sounds like one of the most unique books ever written, and I'm always on the hunt for a new fantasy that feels fresh, that brings something different. Let me start with the positive. Anna Smith Sparg, she is a brilliant author. Like, her prose is really good, and the plot here was fascinating. We kind of follow this warrior, and she's a mom, and she used to be this legend, but now her body is kind of like falling apart because she's old. She's going through menopause, I believe. There's so many things here about motherhood, about the past and stuff that was really well handled. But I found this book so confusing because we're following 2 different plot lines, and I didn't even know there was 2 different plot lines until I was like 100 pages into the story, which made it very confusing. But then just the prose, I didn't know how to describe it except that they describe it, the publisher, as a lyrical folk horror. And that is probably a good description, because if you're not immersed in the prose, then you're not going to enjoy it. But it kind of felt like reading something that you read at a master's course in English literature or something, because it was written in such a strange way. And then I also found the world building to be quite confusing, and then the pacing I found to be overly slow. So yeah, I definitely think it's one of those, if you get lost in the prose, then you'll probably have one of the best times of the year, but if you don't, then you probably won't enjoy it. It was a book I just randomly picked up, and I don't regret reading it, but I did not enjoy it, unfortunately. So those are my biggest disappointments of the year. I hope this year I'll have fewer disappointments, but actually none of the books on this list, I don't regret reading any of them. Whenever I pick up a book that doesn't work for me, I kind of learn more about myself and which books work for me and which books don't work for me, and it's always interesting to see what other authors are doing in the fantasy genre. So I would recommend every one of you to check out these books if you are interested in any of them. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching to the end of this video. Now, if you want to support what I do here, then I do have a Patreon. Now, a reason why I created a Patreon was to find a new way to reinvest to the channel, because basically since I created my Patreon, I spent around 100% of my earnings to hire an editor to do a couple of videos for me a month. Now, since creating my Patreon, an editor has done more than 20 videos for me on my channel, so it makes a huge difference. Now, if you join my Patreon, you will also get some benefits. For example, you'll get a name in my videos like these guys. You'll also be able to join the exclusive Viking book club where every month we read one book together, and you might be the one to put the book forward. This month we're reading this book, and next month we're reading this book. You also get to vote on my next read, get access to exclusive videos like a wrap-up or even book reviews, and so much more. But this is totally voluntary, but all support is much appreciated.